It started with a single sentence that shattered what little strength I had left. "You need to leave. Today." I looked up at my mother, convinced I had misunderstood her. I was sitting on the edge of the guest bed, wrapped in a thin blanket, trying to stop myself from coughing hard enough to wake my 2-week-old daughter. My body felt like it had been drained of everything. Every breath burned. Every movement hurt. I hadn't slept more than an hour at a time since giving birth. "Mom," I whispered, "where am I supposed to go?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she folded another towel and placed it into a cardboard box as if she were packing away things that no longer mattered. My clothes, my baby's tiny blankets, the only diapers I had left. She wouldn't even look at me. "I need your room." Those 4 words hit harder than the fever that had kept me awake for 3 straight nights. "You need my room?" She finally met my eyes. "Richard's son is moving in." For a second, I honestly thought she was joking. Richard was her boyfriend of barely 8 months. His 23-year-old son, Kyle, had recently lost his apartment after quitting another job. Apparently, he needed a fresh start, and somehow that fresh start required throwing out her own daughter and newborn granddaughter. I laughed, not because it was funny, because sometimes your heart refuses to believe what your ears just heard. "You can't be serious." I'm recovering from childbirth. I know. I have pneumonia. You'll get better. I don't even have enough money for a motel." She crossed her arms. "You'll figure something out." Those words would replay in my mind for months. "You'll figure something out." As if surviving was simply a matter of trying harder, as if hospitals accepted determination instead of insurance, as if newborn babies could sleep under bridges because life wasn't convenient. My daughter stirred in her bassinet. I picked her up carefully, pressing her warm little body against my chest. She yawned without opening her eyes. She trusted me completely, and at that moment, I had absolutely no idea how I was supposed to protect her. 3 months earlier, my life had looked completely different. I had a small apartment, a decent office job, a reliable routine. Then everything collapsed faster than I ever imagined possible. The company where I'd worked for nearly 6 years announced massive layoffs. My department disappeared overnight. I was 8 months pregnant. No one wanted to hire someone about to go on maternity leave. I burned through my savings, trying to stay afloat. Then came the emergency delivery. Complications I never saw coming. A week in the hospital. Medical bills that seemed to multiply every time someone walked into my room. When I finally brought my daughter home, I was already drowning. The landlord gave me 30 days. I begged for more time. He gave me 7 extra days before changing the locks. I sold my television, my laptop, my grandmother's necklace, everything that wasn't essential for keeping my baby alive. Eventually, there was only one place left to go, my mother's house. She hugged me when I arrived. "It's only temporary," she'd said. "We'll get through this together." I believed her, maybe because I wanted to, maybe because she's my mother. For the first week, everything seemed fine. She held the baby, cooked soup, asked how I was feeling. I thought maybe this nightmare was finally slowing down. Then Richard started coming over every day. He was loud, opinionated, the kind of man who spoke with complete confidence about subjects he knew nothing about. He'd look at my daughter and say things like, "Babies cry because parents spoil them." Or, "In my day, women didn't complain this much after giving birth." I ignored him. I didn't have the energy to argue. But, little by little, I noticed something changing. My mother laughed at his jokes, repeated his opinions, started treating me like I was a burden instead of her daughter. If the baby cried, she sighed loudly. If I coughed, she complained about germs. If I asked whether we had more formula, she reminded me how expensive babies were. Every conversation ended with me apologizing for existing. One evening, I overheard them talking in the kitchen. Richard didn't know I was awake. They've been here long enough. They're family, my mother replied. So, silence. My son needs that room. Another pause. You've always said you wanted us to build a life together. I do. Then stop feeling guilty. The next morning, my mother couldn't look me in the eye. Now I understood why. She had already made her choice. And it wasn't me. I slowly packed what little we had left: 3 grocery bags, 1 diaper bag, a folded stroller that barely worked. My daughter's bassinet wouldn't fit in the car. Neither would the rocking chair a neighbor had donated after hearing I couldn't afford one. I asked if I could leave those in the garage until I found a place. No. Why? Kyle will need the space. Even memories were apparently taking up too much room. Outside, the sky was gray. Cold rain tapped against the windshield of my 15-year-old sedan. The fuel light had been on since yesterday. I had $34 in my checking account. My phone service was due to shut off the next morning. I buckled my daughter into her car seat. She blinked up at me with those impossibly calm blue eyes. Completely unaware that she no longer had a home, I climbed into the driver's seat and closed the door. For a long time, I couldn't turn the key. I just stared at the front door waiting, praying, hoping my mother would run outside, that she'd knock on the window, tell me she'd made a terrible mistake, tell me to come back inside, tell me none of this was real. Instead, the front curtain moved. I caught a glimpse of her. She was watching us leave, but she never opened the door. A few seconds later, Richard pulled into the driveway. His son Kyle climbed out of the passenger seat, laughing as they carried suitcases toward the house that had just stopped being my home. No one looked at me. No one acknowledged the baby. No one said goodbye. I started the engine with shaking hands. As I pulled away from the curb, a violent coughing fit hit me so hard I had to stop at the end of the street. My chest felt like it was tearing apart. I pressed my forehead against the steering wheel, trying to catch my breath while my daughter began to cry. I wiped away my tears before picking her up. "I've got you," I whispered, even though I had no idea where we were going. The truth was terrifying. I was sick. I was broke. I was homeless. And the only person in the world depending on me had been alive for just 2 weeks. I didn't know it yet, but before the sun came up the next morning, one unexpected stranger would make a decision that changed both of our lives forever. The rain got heavier as I drove away from the only place I had left to call home. Every drop that hit my windshield felt like a countdown. I had $34 in my bank account, less than a quarter tank of gas, a 2-week-old baby sleeping in the back seat, and nowhere to go. I pulled into a grocery store parking lot just to think. The bright lights reflected off the wet pavement while people hurried inside, complaining about getting soaked for a few seconds. I watched families loading groceries into warm SUVs, children laughing as they splashed through puddles. It was strange how normal life kept moving for everyone else. Mine had stopped. I checked my phone. 3% battery, no missed calls, no messages from my mother asking where I was, no apology, nothing. I opened my banking app anyway, hoping maybe I'd forgotten about some money hidden in another account. Balance: $34.07. I laughed bitterly. Then I cried. My daughter stirred in the back seat. I climbed out into the rain and opened her door carefully. "I'm sorry," I whispered as I picked her up. She looked up at me with sleepy eyes before wrapping her tiny fingers around one of mine. She trusted me without question. That made everything hurt even more. I couldn't let her spend the night in a cold car. There had to be somewhere, anywhere. I searched online for emergency shelters. Most required advance intake. Several had no vacancies. One women's shelter was nearly 45 minutes away. And when I finally reached someone, the woman on the phone sounded genuinely sorry. "We're completely full tonight. Is there a waiting list?" I asked. "There is. How long?" "It could be several days." Several days. I thanked her anyway, She gave me the numbers of 2 other shelters. The first never answered, the second answered after almost 10 minutes on hold. We only accept women without children. I stared at the phone. I have a newborn. I'm sorry. Click, the line went dead. For the first time that day, panic began to overpower exhaustion. I was running out of options. And I was running out of daylight. My fever returned with a vengeance. I could feel it spreading through my body like fire beneath my skin. My breathing became shallow. Every cough sent sharp pain through my ribs. I knew I needed a doctor, but I also knew what another hospital visit would mean. More bills, more debt, more problems I couldn't solve. My daughter began crying, a hungry cry. I reached for the diaper bag. 1 bottle left, enough formula for maybe 2 more feedings, 6 diapers. After that, I didn't know. I fed her while sitting in the driver's seat, parked beneath a flickering streetlight. She drank peacefully, completely unaware that her mother was trying not to fall apart. "You deserve so much better than this," I whispered. Tears rolled down my cheeks before I could stop them. The bottle was almost empty when someone knocked on my window. I jumped. A security guard stood outside, motioning for me to lower it. I cracked the window an inch. "Evening, ma'am. Hi. You can't stay here overnight. I'm just feeding my baby." He looked inside the car. His expression softened for a second. "I understand, please. I really do," he sighed. "But store policy says no overnight parking. I don't have anywhere else." He hesitated. I wish I could help. I could tell he meant it. But sympathy didn't change policies. "I have to ask you to move." I nodded. "It's okay." He walked away slowly, looking back once before disappearing into the store. Another door closed. Another reminder that kindness and solutions weren't always the same thing. By 10 o'clock, the rain had become a storm. The roads were nearly empty. I drove without a destination, trying to save gas by turning off the heater whenever I could. The car became colder by the minute. I wrapped my daughter in the last thick blanket we owned. Then I took off my own jacket and covered her with that too. She came first. Always. My stomach growled. I realized I hadn't eaten since breakfast. There was a fast food restaurant still open nearby. I counted my money. If I bought food, I might not have enough gas tomorrow. If I didn't eat, I wasn't sure I'd have enough strength to take care of my baby. I chose a plain cheeseburger from the dollar menu. It felt selfish. Halfway through eating it, I stopped. I couldn't finish it. Instead, I saved the rest for breakfast. Funny how quickly survival changes the way you think. Near midnight, I parked outside a 24-hour urgent care clinic. The lights were still on. People came and went. I stared at the entrance. Should I go inside? What if my pneumonia had gotten worse? What if I collapsed while holding my daughter? I finally gathered enough courage to walk in. The receptionist smiled politely. "Can I help you?" I think I need to see a doctor." "Insurance card?" "I don't have one anymore." She typed something into her computer. "There's a $200 upfront payment." My heart sank. "I only have $30. "I'm sorry." "Please." "I can barely breathe." "I understand, but that's our policy." Policy. Another word that sounded like a locked door. I thanked her quietly and walked back outside. The cold air hit my lungs like knives. I leaned against the wall, coughing so hard that I nearly dropped the diaper bag. A man walking past slowed down. "You okay?" I forced a smile. "I'm fine." It was the biggest lie I'd told all day. Back inside the car, I checked my phone again. 1% battery. I decided to call my mother. Maybe she'd changed her mind. Maybe seeing me leave had made her realize what she'd done. The phone rang once. Twice. 3 times. Then, voicemail. I tried again. Straight to voicemail. She had blocked my number. I stared at the screen until it went black. That hurt more than being thrown out. She hadn't just abandoned me. She had erased me. Around 1 in the morning, my daughter's soft cries filled the car again. I changed her diaper as carefully as I could in the cramped back seat. She settled almost immediately. I wished comforting adults were that simple. As I buckled her back into the car seat, I noticed something on the passenger side windshield, a small folded piece of paper tucked beneath the wiper. For a brief second, I worried it was a parking ticket. I stepped into the rain and unfolded it. It wasn't a ticket. It was a handwritten note. It read, "I saw you at the clinic. You look like you need help. There's a church on Maple Street that opens its community hall at 6 a.m. They don't ask questions. Ask for Mrs. Alvarez." No name, no phone number, just those two sentences. I looked around the empty parking lot. Who had left it? The man who'd asked if I was okay? Someone from inside the clinic? I had no idea, but for the first time since my mother closed the door on us, I felt something I hadn't felt all day. Hope. It was small, fragile, but it was enough to keep me driving. I started the engine one more time, praying the gas would last until morning. I didn't realize it then, but by sunrise I was about to meet a woman whose kindness would expose a secret my mother had spent years trying to bury. The church on Maple Street didn't look like a place where lives changed. It was small, built from faded red brick with a weathered white steeple that leaned just enough to show its age. Rainwater still dripped from the roof as I parked my car across the street. My fuel gauge hovered just above empty. The dashboard clock read 5:47 a.m. 13 minutes. 13 minutes until I would find out whether the note on my windshield had been written by a kind stranger or someone playing a cruel joke. My daughter slept peacefully in her car seat. I watched her tiny chest rise and fall, reminding myself that I couldn't afford to lose hope. At exactly 6 o'clock, the front doors opened. Volunteers stepped inside, carrying coffee urns, folding tables, and cardboard boxes filled with food. One woman caught my attention immediately. She looked to be in her late 60s, with silver hair tucked beneath a knitted cap and the kind of smile that made strangers feel safe. I walked toward her, my legs trembling from exhaustion. "Excuse me," I said quietly. "Are you Mrs. Alvarez?" Her smile softened. "I am. I found a note telling me to ask for you." For a split second, confusion crossed her face. "A note?" I handed it to her. She read it slowly before looking back at me. "I didn't write this." My heart sank. "But," she continued, "whoever did knew this is exactly where people come when they have nowhere else." Before I could respond, a violent coughing fit doubled me over. Mrs. Alvarez reached out to steady me. "Oh, sweetheart." She didn't ask for identification. She didn't ask how I'd ended up there. She simply looked at the baby in my arms and said the words I'd been desperate to hear. "Come inside." The community hall smelled like coffee, toast, and fresh laundry. Someone placed a warm blanket over my shoulders. Another volunteer handed me oatmeal and scrambled eggs. I hadn't realized how hungry I was until the first bite. Mrs. Alvarez gently rocked my daughter while I ate. "You've got a beautiful little girl." I smiled weakly. "Her name is Lily." "Lily." She repeated it like it was something precious. "And what's your name, Emma?" "It's nice to meet you, Emma." I almost laughed. No one had said it was nice to meet me in weeks. After breakfast, Mrs. Alvarez led me into a small office behind the sanctuary. "You can rest here for a while." "I don't want to be a burden," she smiled knowingly. People who worry about being a burden rarely are. Those words nearly made me cry again. She handed me a cup of hot tea. "Now tell me what happened." For the next 20 minutes, I told her everything. Losing my job, the difficult birth, the medical bills, being evicted, moving in with my mother, Richard Kyle, getting thrown out. By the time I finished, the room had become painfully quiet. Mrs. Alvarez folded her hands together. "I've volunteered here for 23 years. I looked at her. "I've heard hundreds of stories." She hesitated. "But yours reminds me of someone." "What do you mean?" She studied my face carefully. "Did your mother always live in this town? Almost all her life. And your father?" The question caught me off guard. "I never knew him." What did your mother tell you? That he left before I was born. Mrs. Alvarez didn't answer immediately. Instead, she walked to an old filing cabinet against the wall. I don't want to jump to conclusions. She opened one of the drawers. But, your face. She searched through several folders before pulling out a faded photograph. The edges were worn from age. She placed it gently on the desk between us. There. I picked it up. The picture showed several church volunteers standing outside during what looked like a food drive. Mrs. Alvarez was much younger. So was my mother. I smiled faintly. I've never seen this. Look behind your mother. I leaned closer. Standing just behind her was a tall man with dark hair. His arm rested comfortably around my mother's shoulders. He was smiling directly at the camera. Something about him felt strangely familiar. I don't understand. Mrs. Alvarez took a slow breath. That's Daniel. Who's Daniel? He wasn't just your mother's boyfriend. She looked me straight in the eyes. He was her fiancé. My stomach tightened. My mother never mentioned anyone named Daniel. I know. She told me my father disappeared. Mrs. Alvarez looked genuinely troubled. That's not what I remember. The room suddenly felt smaller. What do you remember? She hesitated. I remember Daniel coming here almost every weekend. He volunteered. He talked constantly about becoming a father. I stopped breathing for a second. What? He carried ultrasound pictures in his wallet. I stared at her. He was so excited. No, he'd show anyone willing to look. My hands began shaking. That can't be. Mrs. Alvarez nodded slowly. Then one day, he disappeared, just like that. No goodbye, no explanation. We all assumed they'd moved away. I felt my pulse pounding inside my ears. My mother said he abandoned us. Maybe. Mrs. Alvarez chose her next words carefully. Or maybe. She glanced at the photograph again. There's another side to that story. Before I could ask another question, someone knocked on the office door. A young volunteer stepped inside. Mrs. Alvarez? Yes? Emma, if this reaches you, please don't tell your mother we've spoken. My pulse quickened. Another message appeared. I have proof she lied to you for 28 years. Then another. There's something she stole from both of us. I stared at the screen, barely breathing. Finally, the last message arrived. Meet me tomorrow afternoon. Bring no one you don't trust. Attached beneath the text was a photograph. I opened it. My heart stopped. It showed my mother. She looked much younger. She was standing beside Daniel, holding a baby in her arms. Written on the back of the photo, in faded blue ink, were 6 words that turned everything I believed upside down. Our beautiful Emma, Dad loves you forever. And the look on his face made one thing terrifyingly clear. This wasn't a coincidence. He had followed him. Daniel grabbed the envelope and pushed it into my hands. Don't let him take this. What are you talking about? Emma. His voice dropped to a whisper. Richard has spent 28 years making sure you never learned who I was. Before I could ask why, Richard smiled. It wasn't the smile of someone surprised to see an old acquaintance. It was the smile of someone whose carefully buried secret had just walked back into the room. He walked toward our table with the calm confidence of someone who believed he was still in control. His expensive jacket was perfectly pressed, and his polished shoes clicked against the cafe floor with slow, deliberate steps. For a brief moment, no one spoke. Daniel's jaw tightened. I had never seen him look afraid before, but now his face had lost all color. Richard, he said quietly. Daniel, Richard replied with a mocking grin. I should have known you wouldn't stay gone forever. My heart pounded. You two know each other? Richard laughed. Oh, Emma, we've known each other for a very long time. He glanced at the manila envelope in my hands. So, he finally decided to tell you his little story. Daniel stepped slightly in front of me. Leave her alone. Richard ignored him. Instead, he looked directly at me. You really shouldn't believe everything you hear. I folded my arms. I've spent my whole life believing one person's version of the truth. I'm done doing that. For the first time, Richard's smile faded. The cafe had grown unusually quiet. Even the waitress behind the counter seemed to sense the tension. Richard pulled out the empty chair at our table and sat down without being invited. "I suppose," he said, "it's time for everyone to grow up." Daniel shook his head. "Don't do this." Richard leaned back comfortably. "You always were too emotional." Then he turned to me. "Emma, your mother didn't throw you out because she stopped loving you." My stomach tightened. "Then why?" "Because she's terrified." "Terrified of what?" Richard's eyes shifted toward Daniel. "Of the past." I looked at Daniel. "What does that mean?" Before he could answer, Richard spoke again. "Your mother has spent nearly 3 decades protecting one secret." I gripped the envelope tighter. "What secret?" Richard smiled again. "The kind that destroys families." Daniel slammed his hand on the table. "Enough." Richard shrugged. "Fine. You tell her." Daniel closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, they were filled with sadness. "Emma, I wasn't the one who walked away." "I know. I believe that now." He nodded. "But that's only half the story." He reached into his wallet and removed an old, folded newspaper clipping. The paper was yellow with age. Across the top was a headline: "Local businessman accused of financial fraud." The photograph beneath it made my breath catch. A younger Richard, 28 years younger. I looked up in disbelief. "This was before you were born," Daniel explained. "Richard worked for a property investment company. He wasn't just your mother's supervisor. He was under investigation." Richard rolled his eyes. "Charges that were dropped." Daniel didn't even look at him. "They were dropped because the company's owner accepted a settlement." My mind raced. "What does any of this have to do with my mother?" Daniel sighed. "Everything." According to Daniel, my mother had worked in the accounting department. One afternoon, she discovered missing company funds, large amounts, hundreds of thousands of dollars. She confronted Richard. Instead of admitting what he'd done, Richard convinced her to keep quiet. He promised it would all be fixed before anyone noticed. Then the investigation began. The company searched everyone's financial records. My mother panicked. She feared she would be blamed. Daniel wanted her to tell the truth. Richard wanted her to stay silent. She chose Richard. I stared at the newspaper clipping. "So she lied?" Daniel nodded. "To everyone. The company. The investigators. Even me." Richard leaned forward. "You make it sound so simple." It wasn't. Daniel ignored him. When everything started falling apart, Richard convinced her that the easiest solution was to disappear. "I could barely process what I was hearing. So she left you. Because of him?" Daniel nodded slowly. "She believed Richard could protect her. And instead," Richard interrupted. "I did protect her." Daniel laughed bitterly. "You protected yourself." I looked at Richard. "Is any of this true?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stirred the coffee he'd ordered without drinking it. Finally, he shrugged. "Some of it." My stomach turned. "You manipulated her. I gave her options. You destroyed our family. I gave your mother stability. You gave me 28 years without a father." For the first time, Richard looked uncomfortable. Grace quietly approached our table. She'd been watching from across the cafe. "Emma? I'm okay." She looked at Richard carefully. "No, you're not." Richard stood. "I don't think this concerns you." Grace smiled politely. "Any man who helps separate a child from her father concerns me." Richard scoffed. "You don't know anything." Grace calmly folded her arms. "I know enough." The cafe manager noticed the growing argument and walked over. "Is everything all right here?" Daniel nodded. "We're leaving." Richard looked at me one last time. "Before you believe everything Daniel tells you, ask yourself one question. What? If your mother truly wanted to keep you away from him, what was she so afraid you'd discover?" He walked toward the door, then stopped. Without turning around, he added quietly, "Some secrets are worth more than money." Then he left. Silence filled the cafe. I looked at Daniel. What did he mean? Daniel rubbed his forehead. I was hoping we'd have more time. Time for what? He slowly opened another section of the envelope. Inside was a certified copy of an old court filing. Across the top were the words, "Petition for joint custody." I scanned the pages. Daniel had filed for visitation. The petition had been denied. Reason: father's whereabouts unknown. I looked up. But you were right here. I know, my address never changed. I turned another page. Attached was another document, a sworn statement signed by my mother. It declared that Daniel had abandoned us and that his location could not be determined. My hands began shaking. She lied under oath. Daniel nodded. I couldn't understand how, until years later. He reached into the envelope one final time. This time he removed a single sheet of paper, an official-looking form. I frowned. What is this? It's the document that changed everything. I looked closer. It was a birth certificate, mine. At first, it looked completely normal. Then I noticed something strange. There were two versions. The first listed Daniel as my father, the second didn't list a father at all. I stared at them in disbelief. Why are there two? Daniel's expression hardened because the original disappeared. And somehow, a new one was issued. I looked back and forth between the documents. That's impossible. It should be. But someone with connections made it happen. I whispered the only name that made sense. Richard. Daniel nodded. I've spent 28 years trying to prove it. My heart was pounding so loudly I could barely hear him. Then he said the sentence that changed everything. Emma, I don't think Richard was trying to erase me. I looked at him. I think he was trying to hide something much bigger. Before I could ask what he meant, Daniel's phone rang. He answered it, his face drained of color within seconds. No, he whispered. When? He slowly lowered the phone. What happened? I asked. He looked at me with tears in his eyes. Emma, your mother has disappeared. The words echoed in my head long after Daniel ended the call. Your mother has disappeared. I stared at him, waiting for him to explain. What do you mean, disappeared? He slipped his phone back into his pocket. Mrs. Alvarez just called me. I frowned. Why would she call you? After our meeting, I gave her my number in case she needed to reach me. A knot formed in my stomach. Tell me what happened. Daniel took a slow breath. She said Richard and Kyle came back to the house this morning. They were arguing. Neighbors heard shouting. About an hour later, Richard drove away, and your mother's car was gone. No one has seen her since. I wasn't sure what I felt. Fear? Anger? Relief? After everything she'd done to me, I couldn't pretend my first instinct was to rush to her side. But she was still my mother, and somewhere beneath years of disappointment, a part of me still hoped she'd finally tell the truth. We returned to the church in silence. The moment I walked through the fellowship hall doors, Lily let out a tiny cry. Mrs. Alvarez was rocking her gently. The instant I held my daughter again, my racing thoughts slowed. She grounded me. No matter what happened with my mother, Lily came first. Always. Mrs. Alvarez looked at Daniel. I told her. Daniel nodded. She knows. Mrs. Alvarez turned to me. I didn't want you finding out this way. What exactly happened? She hesitated. One of the neighbors came here looking for me. They said police were asking questions. About Richard. My pulse quickened. Why? No one knows yet. That evening, Grace prepared soup while volunteers cleaned the hall. The church had become more than a temporary shelter. It felt like the closest thing to family I'd experienced in years. People checked on Lily. Someone donated a stroller. Another family brought newborn clothes their daughter had outgrown. Small acts of kindness surrounded us everywhere. It made my mother's choices even harder to understand. How could strangers care more than my own family? Just after sunset, my phone rang, an unfamiliar number. I answered cautiously. Hello? Silence then. A shaky voice. Emma, muscle in my body froze. Mom? She was crying, not quietly, not dramatically, the broken, uncontrollable kind of crying that comes when someone realizes they've lost something they can't replace. I didn't know who else to call. I closed my eyes. You blocked my number. I know. I'm so sorry. The words I'd waited years to hear suddenly felt empty. Where are you? I can't tell you. Why? He'll find me. He? Richard. I gripped the phone tighter. What happened? She struggled to catch her breath. I finally confronted him. About what? Everything. Daniel and Mrs. Alvarez exchanged worried glances as they listened from across the room. My mother continued. I asked him if what you discovered was true. And? He admitted it. I felt the room spin. He admitted he convinced me to lie. He admitted he intercepted Daniel's letters. He admitted he used his connections to delay every custody hearing. Tears streamed down my face. So you knew. I didn't know everything. You signed the papers. I was scared. You let me believe my father abandoned me. I know. You watched me cry every Father's Day. I know. You let me hate him. I know. Each answer made my anger grow. Not because she denied it. Because she admitted it. What changed? I asked. Why now? She was quiet for several seconds. Then she whispered, because yesterday, Richard asked me to do the same thing to Lily. My heart stopped. What? He said if you became too difficult, there were ways to make grandparents disappear from legal records. I couldn't breathe. He actually said that? Yes. And that's when I realized I had become the kind of mother I always promised I'd never be. For the first time in the conversation, I heard genuine regret, not excuses, not blame, just heartbreak. I thought I was protecting us. She sobbed. I kept telling myself one more lie would fix the last one, but lies don't disappear. They grow. They become your whole life. I leaned against the wall, trying to steady myself. You threw me out, I know. You chose Richard. I know. You chose Kyle, I know. You chose everyone except me. Silence, then the smallest whisper. I know. Part of me wanted to forgive her. Another part remembered sitting in my freezing car with a newborn, wondering if we'd survive the night. That memory was still too fresh. I don't know if I can forgive you. I understand. I don't even know if I want to. I understand. I don't know who you are anymore. Her crying grew louder. I don't know who I am anymore either. Suddenly her voice changed, sharp, fearful. Oh no. What? I have to go. Mom. He's here. My heart raced. Who? I think Richard found me. The line filled with heavy breathing. A car door slammed somewhere nearby. Then, a man's voice in the background. I couldn't make out the words. Only the anger. Mom. I'm sorry, Emma. For everything, I should have chosen you. The call disconnected. I immediately tried calling back. Straight to voicemail. Again voicemail. Again. Nothing. Daniel grabbed his keys. We have to find her. Grace looked at me. You stay here. I'm coming. No. She's my mother. And Lily needs hers. I looked down at my daughter sleeping peacefully in my arms. Grace was right. If something happened, Lily couldn't lose me too. An hour later, Daniel returned alone. His shoulders were slumped. His face said everything before he spoke. We couldn't find her. Police had already searched the area where her phone last connected to a cell tower. Her car had been found abandoned near an old motel on the edge of town. The keys were still inside. Her purse was on the passenger seat, but she was gone. Late that night, after everyone had gone to bed, I sat beside Lily's bassinet. I watched her tiny hand curl around my finger. I'll never let anyone make you question whether you're loved. She squeezed my finger instinctively. A tear rolled down my cheek. I promise. No matter how much pain I carried, it would end with me. The cycle would end with me. Just as I was about to turn off the bedside lamp, someone knocked softly on the church office door. Daniel opened it. A police officer stood outside. Mr. Carter? Yes, we found something in your former fiancé's vehicle. The officer held up a small sealed evidence bag. Inside was a silver key. Attached to it was an old paper tag with faded handwriting. The officer looked at me. Does the name Hawthorne Storage mean anything to either of you? Daniel's eyes widened. He whispered, "Oh, my God." I frowned. What is it? He stared at the key as though he'd seen a ghost. 28 years ago, I rented a storage unit. What was inside? He looked at me, his voice barely above a whisper. Everything your mother couldn't bring herself to destroy. Then he swallowed hard. If that unit is still there, the truth has been waiting for us all this time. I couldn't stop staring at the small silver key. It looked ordinary, a worn piece of metal with faded scratches and an old paper tag that read, Hawthorne Storage. Unit 214. How could something so small carry nearly 3 decades of unanswered questions? The police officer carefully placed the evidence bag on the table. We've documented it, he explained. Since the key wasn't connected to any criminal investigation, it can be released to the next of kin if ownership is established. Daniel immediately reached into his wallet. I still have the original rental agreement. The officer raised his eyebrows. You kept it? Daniel gave a sad smile. I kept everything. The next morning, after signing several forms at the police station, Daniel and I drove to Hawthorne Storage. Grace stayed behind with Lily, as much as I wanted my daughter close. I couldn't bring myself to take a 2-week-old baby into a dusty storage facility while I unraveled decades of family secrets. The drive was almost silent. Neither of us knew what waited behind that metal door. When we arrived, the storage manager looked through old paper records before disappearing into the back office. A few minutes later, he returned carrying a thick binder. I've worked here 20 years, he said, but this account goes back even further. He ran his finger down the faded pages. Unit 214. He looked up at Daniel. You never closed it. Daniel frowned. I thought the payments stopped years ago. The manager shook his head. They didn't. Someone has been paying the annual storage fee every single year. I stared at him. Who? He turned the binder around. The signature on every yearly payment receipt was the same. Margaret Wilson. My mother. Daniel looked as stunned as I felt. She kept paying? The manager nodded. Without missing a single year. A few moments later, we stood in front of Unit 214. The metal door looked untouched by time. My hands trembled as Daniel inserted the old key. For a second, it wouldn't turn, then, click, the lock released. Daniel slowly lifted the heavy door. Dust floated through the sunlight. Inside sat dozens of neatly stacked boxes. Nothing looked disturbed. It was as if someone had frozen an entire chapter of life and walked away. The first box contained baby clothes, tiny blankets, stuffed animals, a crib mobile still sealed in its original packaging. I picked up a small knitted sweater. A tag hung from one sleeve for Emma. Love, Dad. Tears blurred my vision. You bought all this? Daniel nodded. I wanted your first room to be perfect. The second box held photo albums. Every stage of my mother's pregnancy, ultrasound pictures. Baby shower invitations. Pictures of Daniel painting a nursery. There was love in every photograph. Real love. The kind you can't fake for a camera. Then I found something else. A journal. The cover simply read, Sarah, my mother's name. Daniel looked surprised. I've never seen that. I carefully opened it. The first pages described her excitement about becoming a mother. Then the entries changed. One paragraph made my blood run cold. Richard says Daniel will only hold me back. He says I deserve more than a mechanic's paycheck. I know Daniel loves me, but Richard says love doesn't pay bills. I turned another page. Richard promised everything will be easier if I sign the papers. He says Daniel will eventually move on. Another page. I lied today. I hate myself for it. And another. I keep telling myself I'll fix this before Emma is old enough to understand. The words grew shakier. Every lie creates another one. I had to stop reading. The guilt pouring from those pages was overwhelming. Daniel sat quietly on an old wooden chair in the corner. I never stopped loving her. I looked at him. Even after everything? He nodded slowly. I stopped trusting her. But love, he sighed. Love isn't always logical. Near the back of the storage unit stood a locked filing cabinet. Unlike everything else, it looked newer. Daniel frowned. I don't remember this. The manager allowed us to force the small lock open. Inside were legal folders, bank statements, Burfardi records, insurance documents. One folder had Richard's name written across it. I opened it. The first document immediately caught my attention. Quitclaim deed property transfer. Grantor, Sarah Wilson grantee, Richard Collins transfer amount 1 pint sign. What is this? I whispered. Daniel took the papers. His face darkened. This was your grandparents' lake house. My grandparents owned a lake house? He nodded. They left it to your mother after they passed away. I kept reading. According to the documents, Richard had convinced my mother to transfer ownership to him for $1 just 5 years earlier. Everything she'd inherited was now legally his. My chest tightened. He stole it. Daniel shook his head. No, he manipulated her into giving it away. Then we found another folder. This one had my name. I stared at it in confusion. Why would my name be here? Inside was a trust agreement, established by my grandfather shortly before his death. Beneficiary, Emma Wilson Trust Value, SN Arzen Funds 485,000. I blinked. There had to be some mistake. I've never heard of this. Daniel quickly read through the paperwork. His expression changed instantly. Emma, what? This trust was never cancelled. It couldn't have been. So, where is it? He turned to the final page, his jaw clenched. The listed trustee wasn't my mother. It wasn't my grandfather's attorney. It wasn't Daniel. It was Richard. I felt the air leave my lungs. He controlled my trust? Daniel nodded. And according to these records, he's been managing it for years. My hands shook with anger. If this money existed, why was I homeless? Why couldn't I afford medicine? Why did my daughter sleep in a car? Daniel didn't answer. He didn't have to. The answer sat in black ink right in front of us. Someone had hidden my future while I struggled just to survive. Within hours, Daniel arranged a meeting with an attorney he'd trusted for years. Attorney Linda Harper reviewed every document carefully. She barely spoke for nearly 30 minutes. Finally, she looked up. If these documents are authentic, they are. Then Richard may have violated multiple fiduciary duties. She tapped the trust agreement. More important.